The galaxy was old, very old. Billions of years had passed since the first intelligent species looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. In that time, empires had risen and fallen. Wars had burned across entire star clusters. Species had been born, grown powerful, and then vanished into history like dust in the cosmic wind. By the time humanity took its first steps beyond Earth, the galaxy had already been divided up among the elder races. These ancient civilizations had carved out their territories long before humans learned to make fire. They had rules, they had hierarchies, they had a very clear understanding of how things worked. At the top sat the HFY. They were tall beings with gray skin that looked like polished stone. They had 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern on their elongated skulls. Their empire stretched across 40,000 star systems. Their warships numbered in the millions. For 18,000 years, they had been the dominant power in the known galaxy, and they intended to stay that way forever. Below them came the Arathi. These were crystalline beings that grew rather than reproduced. Each Arathi started as a small seed and slowly accumulated matter over centuries until they became towering structures of living mineral. They were patient and wise, but they had learned long ago not to challenge the HFY directly. It was easier to survive by being useful. Then there were the hollow minds. Nobody knew what they had looked like originally. They had long ago abandoned physical bodies entirely, existing now as vast networks of pure thought that drifted between stars. They calculated and observed and predicted, but they rarely acted. They saw themselves as above the concerns of physical beings. Dozens of other species filled out the middle ranks of galactic civilization. The insectoid creeks, the aquatic Dumni, the silicon-based Mortith, and many others. Each had found their place in the order of things. Each had learned the unwritten rules that govern survival. And then there were the newcomers, the young species who were just beginning to reach beyond their home systems. These were watched carefully by the elder races. Most of them made mistakes. They grew too quickly, or they made demands, or they failed to show proper respect. When that happened, they were dealt with. The galaxy had a word for it. They called it containment. It sounded clean and administrative. Ekit meant anything from economic restrictions to orbital bombardment. Humanity had entered this galaxy 300 years ago. Their first faster-than-light ship had stumbled into Arathi space quite by accident. The crystalline beings had been curious rather than hostile. They had examined these soft, fragile creatures from a yellow star at the galaxy's edge and found them interesting but unremarkable. The humans were granted observer status in the concordant of aligned species. This was the closest thing the galaxy had to a government. It was really just a framework for the elder races to manage their relationships and keep the younger species in line. Observer status meant humanity could attend meetings, conduct limited trade, and exist without being immediately classified as a threat. For 3 centuries, our humanity did exactly what was expected of them. They were polite at diplomatic functions. They traded modest amounts of goods and information. They asked questions constantly, which the elder races found amusing. Humans wanted to know everything. How did HFY faster-than-light drives work? What were the theoretical limits of energy generation? How did the Arathi grow their famous living ships? What had the hollow minds learned in their millions of years of existence? The elder races answered some questions and deflected others. They saw no harm in it. Humanity was confined to a single star system. They had perhaps 50 billion people, which seemed like a lot to them, but was nothing compared to the trillions that populated elder race civilizations. Their technology was primitive. Their military was laughable. They posed no threat to anyone. Ambassador Sarah Chen attended her first concordant assembly when she was 32 years old. She stood in a vast chamber on the Valtai capital world, surrounded by beings that had been traveling between stars when her ancestors were still living in caves. She smiled and nodded and said all the right things. Inside, she was taking notes. Sarah Chen was part of a program that had no official name. It existed in no database that the elder races could access. Its members were scattered throughout human society, in positions ranging from ambassadors to engineers to teachers. They all had one thing in common. They understood what humanity was really doing. Humanity was watching. Humanity was learning. Humanity was planning. It had started just 50 years after first contact. A group of human historians, game theorists, and strategic analysts had been given a simple task: study galactic history, find patterns, predict outcomes. What they found had terrified them. The pattern was clear once you knew where to look. Young species rose to prominence all the time. Some of them grew quickly. Some of them developed impressive technologies. Some of them began to challenge the existing order of things. And then sooner or later, they were dealt with. The Kasari had been a promising species 3 million years ago. They had developed a unique form of biological technology that let them grow ships and weapons from living tissue. The Vothkai had watched them for 10,000 years waiting. When the Kasari finally became advanced enough to be considered a potential threat, the Vothkai had acted. The official record said the Kasari had suffered a series of unfortunate plagues. There were no Croasari left to disagree. The Yum had made the mistake of openly criticizing the Concordate's power structure. They had called for reforms. They had demanded equal representation. They had formed alliances with other younger species. The Vothkai response had been swift. The Yol homeworld still existed, but it was now an irradiated wasteland with a permanent Vothkai military garrison in orbit. The survivors had been scattered across the galaxy as refugees, never to reunite. The singing moons of Turs had been a collective consciousness that spread across dozens of worlds. They had never threatened anyone. They had never demanded anything. But their form of existence was fundamentally different from the elder races. Indifference was dangerous. The hollow minds had calculated that the singing moons might one day become unpredictable. That was enough. The campaign against them had been called a stabilization effort. It had lasted 300 years and ended with a complete extinction of an entire way of being. These were not secrets. The information was available in historical databases if you knew where to look. The elder races did not hide what they had done. They simply presented it as necessary and inevitable. Younger species caused instability. Instability threatened the order that had kept the galaxy functioning for billions of years. Therefore, younger species had to be controlled. Human analysts ran the numbers. They built models. They simulated thousands of possible futures. Every single simulation ended the same way. While humanity would eventually be seen as a threat, it might take 1,000 years. It might take 10,000. But at some point, humans would do something that triggered the elder race's attention. Maybe they would develop a technology that seemed dangerous. Maybe they would expand too quickly. Maybe they would simply be in the wrong place at the wrong time. When that happened, they would be contained. The only question was what to do about it. Some argued for acceptance. Perhaps humanity could survive by being useful. Like the Arathi, they could find a niche and stay in it forever, never threatening anyone, never aspiring to more. Others argued for isolation. Maybe humanity could hide, go silent, disappear into some distant corner of the galaxy, and hope no one came looking. Neither option sat well with the strategist. Acceptance meant eternal subservience with the constant threat of extermination hanging overhead. Isolation was probably impossible. The elder races had sensors and scouts everywhere. Sooner or later, they would find any hiding place. A third option emerged from the models. It was crazy. It was impossibly ambitious. It would require sacrifices that no democratic society should be able to make. But it was the only option that gave humanity a real chance at long-term survival. They called it the Prometheus Initiative. The plan was simple in concept and staggeringly complex in execution. Humanity would secretly build a military force so overwhelming that no combination of elder races could hope to defeat it. They would hide this buildup completely until it was ready. Then they would reveal it all at once, presenting the galaxy with a simple choice: accept humanity as an equal or face destruction. It was deterrence on a scale never before attempted, and it would require humanity to fundamentally transform itself without anyone noticing. The first challenge was resources. Building a force capable of deterring the elder races would require a significant portion of humanity's entire economic output. This had to be hidden. Economists and accountants worked for years to create systems of false records and ghost transactions. Money flowed into the black. Factories were built in hidden locations. Supply chains were established that existed on no official registry. The second challenge was technology. Humanity's science was primitive compared to the elder races. That had to change. but it had to change secretly. So human scientists formed research groups that officially studied boring topics like agricultural efficiency or weather prediction. Their real work happened in facilities buried deep underground or floating in the darkness between stars. They made breakthroughs that would have shocked the galaxy and told no one. The third challenge was secrecy itself. How do you hide a secret from civilizations that have been watching the galaxy for millions of years? The answer was patience and misdirection. Humanity played the role the elder races expected. They seemed disorganized and inefficient. They publicly squabbled over minor issues. They let their official technology lag behind what they were actually capable of. Ambassador Sarah Chen spent 40 years playing this role. She attended thousands of meetings as she smiled at 10,000 diplomatic receptions. She reported back to Earth on everything she learned, and she carefully fed the elder races exactly the information they expected to receive. Sometimes, she wondered if it was all worth it. The sacrifices were enormous. Entire generations had devoted their lives to a project they would never see completed. Children were raised knowing they would never enjoy the fruits of their labor. People worked and died in secret facilities that officially did not exist. But then she would remember the Kasari, and the Yule, and the singing moons. She would remember what happened to species that failed to protect themselves. And she would go back to smiling at Vuthkai diplomats and pretending to be impressed by technologies that human scientists had quietly surpassed decades ago. The years passed. Decades became centuries. The Prometheus Initiative grew in the darkness, fed by the quiet dedication of billions of people who understood what was at stake. In the Oort cloud, far beyond the orbit of any planet, construction began on something that had never existed before. Human engineers looked at the designs and wondered if they were crazy for even attempting this. Their grandparents had started this work. Their grandchildren would finish it. That was simply how long it took to build a weapon capable of standing against the entire galaxy. On Earth, people lived their normal lives. They went to work and raised families and complained about taxes. Most of them had no idea that a significant portion of their economy was being diverted to build something impossible. The secret was held by a surprisingly small number of people, bound together by an understanding of what failure would mean. And in the great halls of the Concordant, the elder races continued to dismiss humanity as a minor curiosity. They were too young, too small, too primitive to matter. They posed no threat to anyone. This was exactly what humanity wanted them to think. High Observer Keith Vanos, of the Vuthkai Internal Security Division, reviewed his annual report on minor species. Humanity appeared on page 47, between the newly discovered fungal networks of Epsilon Hydri and the increasingly irrelevant remnants of the Delumni trading guilds. The report noted that human economic activity had grown by approximately 2% over the past year, slightly below galactic average. Their technology remained primitive. Their military consisted of a few dozen patrol ships, barely capable of system defense. Keith Vanos signed the report without reading the humanity section. He had more important things to worry about. There were rumors of unrest in the Mortith territories. The Hollow Minds had made a cryptic statement about approaching singularities that needed interpretation. Real threats required his attention. He did not notice that human economic output had been growing at exactly 2% per year for the past century. Never more, never less. He did not wonder why such a famously chaotic species had achieved such remarkable consistency. He did not ask where all the graduates from human engineering programs were going, or why human deep space exploration had quietly ceased 3 decades ago. Nobody asked these questions. Nobody thought humanity was worth watching that closely. And so the secret held. Year after year, decade after decade, the greatest construction project in human history continued in perfect darkness. The people working on it grew old and trained replacements. Governments rose and fell on Earth, each one quietly briefed on the initiative and each one accepting the burden. Children who had been born after the project started reached middle age and began preparing for their own retirement. The work continued. Ambassador Sarah Chen died at the age of 112. She never saw the completion of what she had spent her life protecting, but she died knowing that her granddaughter had been selected for the crew of one of the vessels. The work would continue. In the Vuthkai, celebrated the 18,000th anniversary of their empire, with a festival that lasted a full orbital cycle of their home world. They congratulated themselves on their wisdom and strength. They looked out at the galaxy they dominated and saw no serious challenges on any horizon. They had no idea that the challenge was already built, waiting in the darkness, and that the species they had dismissed as irrelevant was about to change everything. Admiral Chen Wayne stood on an observation deck that officially did not exist, looking at something that should have been impossible. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see the curve of a hull stretching away toward a distant horizon. That horizon was 3,000 kilometers away. She was standing inside something larger than most moons. They called it Prometheus, or it was the first of 12. Wei-En was 67 years old. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for this moment. Her grandmother, Ambassador Sarah Chen, had died before the first hull plates were laid. Her mother had worked in the propulsion division for 40 years. Wei-En herself had started as a junior engineer at age 22 and climbed through the ranks to become the commanding officer of the most powerful weapon humanity had ever built. Sometimes she still could not believe any of this was real. She touched the viewport, feeling the slight vibration of construction activity transmitted through kilometers of hull material. Outside, automated construction swarms moved across the surface like silver rivers, depositing layer after layer of armor and equipment. Each swarm contained millions of individual units working in perfect coordination. They never rested. They never made mistakes. They had been building continuously for almost a century. Director Marcus Webb walked up beside her. He was older than Wine, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many classified briefings. He ran the overall Prometheus initiative, coordinating the efforts of millions of workers across hundreds of secret facilities. The latest production numbers, he said, handing her a tablet, were actually ahead of schedule for the first time in 30 years. Wyan scrolled through the data. Power generation systems were at 94% completion. Primary weapons arrays were being installed on the forward sections. Life support could now sustain 2 billion people indefinitely. The engines, those incredible, impossible engines, were undergoing final calibration. How long until full operational capability? She asked. 3 years for Prometheus itself. The other 11 vessels are at various stages. The last one, Athena, won't be complete for another decade, but we should have enough online to matter well before that. Juan nodded. They had planned for this timeline. The question was whether the universe would cooperate. She thought about the journey that had brought them here. 90 years of secret construction, 90 years of hidden breakthroughs, 90 years of sacrifice by people who would never see the results of their work. The early decades had been the hardest. Humanity had to develop entirely new technologies just to make the initiative possible, and their existing science was nowhere near advanced enough to build something like Prometheus. The breakthrough had come from an unlikely source. A young physicist named Yuki Tanaka had been studying the theoretical limits of gravity manipulation. The elder races used artificial gravity on their ships, but their technology was based on principles that were well understood and relatively limited. Tanaka had found a different approach, one that allowed for much more powerful effects. Her discovery had changed everything. With proper gravity manipulation, you could create artificial mass. With artificial mass, you could bend space. With bent space, you could do things that the elder races thought were impossible. Tanaka had died young, burned out by decades of intense work, but her legacy lived on in every system aboard Prometheus. The ship's drives were based on her principles. So were the artificial gravity systems that made life comfortable for millions of crew members. So were the weapons. The weapons were what made Prometheus truly terrifying. One walked along the observation deck until she reached a section that looked out over one of the primary weapons installations. It looked almost peaceful from this distance, a graceful curve of metal and crystal about the size of a small city. But she knew what it was capable of. The main armament of a Prometheus-class vessel was designed to fight on a scale that the elder races had never imagined. These were not ship-to-ship weapons. These were not even planet killers, though they could certainly destroy a planet if needed. These were weapons designed to affect stars. The physics were elegant in their simplicity. Stars were fusion reactors held in balance by gravity. Disturb that balance and the star would respond. Make it burn hotter and it would swell. Make it burn colder and it would contract. Push hard enough in the right way, and you could trigger a nova. Prometheus carried 3 different systems capable of stellar manipulation. It could force a star into premature death, sterilizing everything within light years. It could trigger precise flares aimed at specific targets. It could, in theory, destabilize a star so badly that it collapsed into a black hole. These weapons had never been tested at full power. There was no way to test them without attracting attention. But the math had been checked and rechecked by generations of physicists. The simulations had been run millions of times. When the time came, the weapons would work. Edwin hoped they would never actually have to use them. The point was deterrence. The point was making the elder races understand that attacking humanity would cost them everything. She continued her walk through the massive vessel. The interior of Prometheus was designed to be a mobile civilization. There were residential districts that could house entire cities. There were agricultural sections, capable of feeding billions. There were factories that could produce anything humanity might need, from medicine to smaller warships. The plan was for each Prometheus-class vessel to be completely self-sufficient. If something happened to Earth, if the worst-case scenario came to pass, humanity could survive aboard these ships forever. They would become a wandering civilization, impossible to corner, impossible to destroy. Netchuan visited the command center, a vast chamber deep in the heart of the ship. Hundreds of stations were arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. Right now, most of the stations were unmanned, with only a skeleton crew monitoring construction progress. In 3 years, this room would be filled with the best officers humanity had ever trained, controlling a weapon that could challenge the galaxy. Commander David Park was on duty at the central platform. He was young for his rank, only 35, but he had proven himself in 1,000 simulations. He would be Wayan's second in command when Prometheus became operational. "Admiral," he said, saluting, "we have the latest intelligence report from Earth. Anything concerning?" Park hesitated. "The Votuekai have increased their monitoring of our outer system with nothing direct, but their sensor platforms have been repositioned. We think they might have noticed some anomalies." Wynne frowned. This was always the fear. They had worked so hard to hide everything, but perfect secrecy was impossible. All it would take was one curious Vilai investigator asking the right questions. What kind of anomalies? Energy signatures. Mostly the construction swarms generate a lot of waste heat. We've been venting it gradually, but some of it must be reaching detection range. Also, there have been some gravitational disturbances. Prometheus is massive enough to affect local orbit slightly. Have they sent any investigators? Not yet. Our diplomatic team has been feeding them explanations. Industrial accidents, experimental mining operations, that sort of thing. And so far, they seem to be accepting the cover stories. So far, those were dangerous words. Juan had studied galactic history extensively. The Vakai were patient, but they were not stupid. If they became truly suspicious, they had the resources to investigate thoroughly, and if they discovered what was being built out here, they would not wait for explanations. "Keep me informed of any developments, Sauer," she said, "and increase our contingency preparations. If we have to accelerate the timeline, I want us ready." Park nodded and returned to his work. Wayan stood in the command center for a while longer, thinking about all the things that could go wrong. The hardest part of the initiative had always been the human element. Keeping a secret this big required the cooperation of millions of people across multiple generations, when any one of them could have betrayed the project deliberately or accidentally. Any one of them could have talked to the wrong person or left the wrong document in the wrong place. But they had not. Through 90 years of work, through leadership changes and economic crises and everything else, the secret had held. One sometimes wondered how that was possible. She had seen humanity at its worst. All the petty conflicts and selfish behaviors that seemed to define the species. How had they managed to work together on something this big for this long? The answer, she had decided, was fear. Not fear of punishment or consequences, but fear of what would happen if they failed. Everyone involved in the initiative understood what was at stake. They had seen the historical records, and they knew what the elder races did to species that threatened them. The fear of extinction was a powerful motivator. But there was something else too, something that Wynne had trouble putting into words. Pride, maybe, or hope. The people working on Prometheus were not just trying to avoid destruction. They were trying to build something new. They were trying to change the rules of a galaxy that had run on violence and domination for billions of years. Maybe that was naive. Maybe the elder races would simply destroy humanity no matter what they built. Maybe there was no escape from the brutal mathematics of galactic civilization. But Wei Lin did not believe that. She believed that humanity could make a difference. She believed that the weapons they were building would never have to be fired. She believed that someday, decades or centuries from now, her descendants would look back on this project and see it as the moment when everything changed. She left the command center and took a transport pod to one of the research sections. This was where the most advanced work was being done, where scientists pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Dr. Yuki Tanaka II was waiting for her. She was named after her great-grandmother, the physicist who had made it all possible. She had the same sharp eyes and the same intense focus. "Admiral, I have something to show you." They walked through corridors lined with equipment that Wei-En could not have identified, even with her extensive technical training. The research section was its own world, filled with people who spent their lives asking questions that no one had ever asked before. "We've made a breakthrough in communication technology," Tanaka said. "Quantum entanglement at range, instantaneous transmission across any distance, completely undetectable by conventional sensors." Juan understood the implications immediately. "We could coordinate the entire fleet in real time. No lag, no interception." "Exactly. But it gets better. We've also developed applications for this technology that go beyond simple communication. We can use it for sensing. Imagine being able to see anything anywhere in the galaxy instantly. No more guessing what the Vitae are doing. No more wondering if we've been discovered. How long until it's operational? We're installing the first systems now. By the time Prometheus is ready for deployment, Shash will have full capability." Felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel: optimism. Every breakthrough like this improved their chances. Every new capability made the initiative more likely to succeed, but she knew better than to become overconfident. The elder races had not maintained their power for millions of years by being careless. They had technologies and resources that humanity could only guess at. The only advantage humanity had was surprise. She spent the rest of the day touring the ship, meeting with department heads, reviewing progress reports. Everywhere she went, she saw people working with quiet determination. They knew what they were building. They knew why it mattered. They did not need speeches or motivation. They simply did their jobs day after day, year after year. When, as the artificial night cycle began, and the lights dimmed throughout the massive vessel, Wei-En returned to her quarters. They were modest by flag officer standards, but she had never cared much about luxury. She had a bed, a desk, and a window looking out at the construction work that never stopped. She thought about her grandmother, who had spent decades smiling at aliens, while secretly working to ensure humanity's survival. She thought about her mother, who had died in an accident at one of the construction facilities, another unnamed casualty of the initiative. She thought about all the people who had given their lives to this project, without ever seeing what they were building. 3 more years. After 90 years of preparation, the end was finally in sight. Juan looked out at the stars beyond the construction swarms. Somewhere out there, the Vithkai were going about their business, secure in their dominance of the galaxy. They had no idea that everything was about to change. She hoped they would choose wisely when the time came. She hoped the deterrent would work, and the weapons would never have to be used. She hoped that humanity could introduce itself to the galaxy as a friend rather than a destroyer. But if they forced her hand, if they chose to attack rather than accept, she would not hesitate. She had spent her entire life preparing for this responsibility. She understood what was at stake. The stars continued to shine, indifferent to the plans being made beneath them. The construction swarms continued their work, building something that would change everything. Wen and Admiral Chen Lin closed her eyes and dreamed of a future that her grandmother had died believing in. In 3 years, humanity would step out of the shadows. In 3 years, the galaxy would learn that the quiet species at the edge of known space was not what it appeared to be. In 3 years, everything would change. High Executive Rethanos sat in his private study on the Vethkai capital world, surrounded by screens displaying information that deeply troubled him. The room was dark, except for the glow of the displays. He preferred it that way. Light was for public spaces, where appearances mattered. Here, alone with his thoughts, he needed only the data. The data was telling him something was very wrong with humanity. He had been studying the reports for 3 standard cycles now. Anna, ever since a junior analyst, had flagged some irregularities in human economic output. The analyst had expected praise for catching a minor accounting error. Instead, Reth Venos had quietly transferred her to a classified research team and begun his own investigation. What he had found was disturbing. Human economic numbers did not match their visible infrastructure. This was not unusual in itself. Many species had inefficiencies or corruption that created gaps between reported output and actual production. What was unusual was the pattern. For almost a century, human economic growth had been exactly 2% per year. Not approximately 2%. Exactly 2% to 4 decimal places. No species achieved that kind of consistency. Naturally, markets fluctuated. Populations changed. Technologies improved at uneven rates. A perfect stability like this required deliberate management on a scale that should have been impossible for a species as politically fragmented as humanity. Then there was the energy consumption data. Reth Venos had pulled records from Bethkai sensor platforms positioned throughout the region of space near humanity's system. Energy signatures from the Sol system had been increasing steadily for decades, far faster than their official economic growth could explain. Where was all that energy going? He had traced supply chains that seemed to disappear into nothing. Ships full of raw materials would leave human mining colonies in the asteroid belt and simply vanish from tracking systems. They would reappear weeks later empty, with no record of where they had delivered their cargo. He had analyzed communication patterns and found that human scientific publications had dropped by 60% over the past century, even as their educational institutions continued to produce more graduates than ever. Where were all those scientists? What were they working on? The picture that emerged from his investigation was incomplete, but the shape of it was clear enough. Humanity was hiding something massive, something that required resources on a scale that dwarfed anything they had officially admitted to. Rethanos considered the possibilities. Perhaps the humans had discovered a rich resource deposit somewhere and were keeping it secret for economic advantage. Perhaps they had developed some new technology and were trying to establish a monopoly before revealing it. These would be understandable motivations. Hanuri, the kind of short-term thinking that young species often displayed. But there was another possibility, one that Rethanos did not want to consider, but could not ignore. Perhaps humanity had looked at galactic history and drawn the same conclusions that every thoughtful analyst eventually reached. Perhaps they understood what happened to species that challenged the established order. Perhaps they were preparing to defend themselves. This possibility was dangerous because it implied a level of strategic thinking that the Vitmatikai had not credited to humanity. It suggested that their apparent weakness in disorganization had been an act maintained for 3 centuries. It meant that everything the Vitikai thought they knew about this species might be wrong. Reth Vanos made a decision. He would present his findings to the Circle of Executives, the highest authority in Bethkai civilization. They would decide how to respond. The meeting chamber of the Circle was ancient, carved from the bedrock of the capital world 8,000 years ago. The walls were covered with inscriptions recording the great victories of Vothkai history. Every species they had defeated, every threat they had contained, was commemorated here. The room was designed to remind those who entered it that the Vithkai had been dealing with challenges for a very long time. 7 executives sat in a semicircle, their gray skin nearly invisible in the dim light. These were the most powerful individuals in Vithkai civilization, each responsible for a different aspect of imperial security. Rethanos had served on the Circle for 300 years, and he was the youngest among them. "You have called this emergency session," said First Executive Keith Mora, the eldest of the group. "We assume you have good reason." Rethanos activated his presentation. The data appeared in the air before the Circle, floating holographic displays that showed everything he had discovered. "Humanity is hiding something," he said. "I do not yet know what, but the scale is enormous. I believe they may be preparing for conflict." He walked them through the evidence. The impossibly stable economic growth, the missing energy, the vanishing supply chains. the declining scientific publications, the gaps in sensor coverage that the humans seemed to know about and exploit. The executives listened in silence. Their faces showed nothing. They had all been trained from birth to control their expressions. Nashwan Rethvanos finished. Keith Morris spoke first. What is your assessment of the threat level? Unknown. That is what concerns me most. We have been monitoring humanity for 3 centuries, and we still do not know what they are capable of. That suggests a level of operational security that should be beyond a species this young. Executor Vithal, who oversaw military operations, leaned forward. You are suggesting that the humans have been deceiving us, deliberately playing a role. I am suggesting that we should consider the possibility. Why would they do this? They are contained in a single system. They have no allies. Their technology is primitive. What could they possibly hope to achieve? Rethanos had asked himself the same question many times. Survival, he said finally. They know what happens to species that appear threatening. They may have decided to become threatening in secret, waiting until they are strong enough to reveal themselves. Strong enough for what? To defeat the entire Concorded? I do not know, but I do not think we should wait to find out. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some executives argued for continued observation. They wanted more data before taking action. Others pointed out that gathering more data would give humanity more time to complete whatever they were building. The safest course was to act now, before the situation became worse. In the end, the circle reached a consensus. Humanity would be contained. A fleet would be sent to Sol's system, with enough force to overwhelm any conceivable resistance. If the humans would be given the choice to surrender peacefully or face destruction, this was standard procedure. The Vatafkai had done it dozens of times over the millennia. Most species surrendered when they saw the force array against them. Those that did not were made examples of. Either way, the threat was neutralized. Executive Vithol took charge of the military planning. 6 carrier groups were assembled, the largest deployment against a single system in nearly 2,000 years. 12,000 warships, ranging from small attack craft to massive battleships that could level continents with their weapons. It was overwhelming force, designed to end the situation before it truly began. Ravanos watched the preparations with growing unease. Something did not feel right. The humans had been hiding something for a century. They must have known that eventually they would be discovered. What would they do when the Vathkai fleet arrived? He found himself reviewing the historical records. The Kasari, the Yolm, the Singing Moons, all the species that had been contained over the millennia. None of them had seen it coming. None of them had been prepared. But humanity had been watching. They had been learning. They had specifically studied what happened to species that challenged the established order. Would they really have hidden their preparations if they did not believe they had a chance? The fleet departed from Vathkai space with great ceremony. News of the deployment was broadcast throughout the Empire. Citizens gathered to watch the massive ships enter faster than light transit, proud of their civilization's power. The official announcement described the mission as a stabilization effort to address potential security concerns. The word containment was not used publicly, but everyone understood what was happening. Rethanos remained at the capital, coordinating intelligence gathering. He had scouts positioned throughout the region of space, between Vathkai territory and Sol system. They reported the fleet's progress every few hours. The journey would take 23 days, fast by the standards of galactic travel, but still more than enough time for humanity to prepare. Rethanos wondered what they would find when they arrived. He had ordered additional sensor sweeps of the solar system, but the data was frustratingly incomplete. The humans had positioned stations that generated interference across broad spectrum ranges. They claimed these were for astronomical research. Looking at them now, Rethanos suspected their real purpose was to blind Vathikai surveillance. The days passed. The fleet crossed the vast distances between stars. Unstoppable. Inevitable. Reports came in regularly showing nothing unusual. Human diplomatic communications continued as normal. Their official representatives expressed confusion and concern about the fleet movement, but did not seem panicked. That bothered Rethanos. If he had a fleet of 12,000 warships heading toward his homeworld, he would be panicked. He would be begging for negotiations, offering concessions, doing anything to prevent what was coming. The humans were doing none of these things. On the 19th day, the fleet entered the outer edges of the solar system. They dropped to sublight speeds and began their approach toward the inner worlds. Human defense stations sent formal protests, demanding to know the purpose of this incursion. The fleet commander ignored them. On the 21st day, the fleet reached the orbit of Neptune, the outermost major planet in the human system. They were now within clear sensor range of Earth. The commander broadcast the standard ultimatum: surrender unconditionally, or face destruction. The human response came not from Earth, but from a ship that had been positioned between the fleet and the inner system. It was small by Vintai standards, barely larger than a scout craft, but the message it carried was anything but small. Your fleet is detected and tracked. You are advised to halt your advance and await further communication. The coordinates and timestamp for clarification will follow. The message included a set of coordinates pointing to a region of space beyond the orbit of Neptune, far from any known human installation. It also included a timestamp just hours away. Fleet Commander Vaitsara was annoyed by this response. It was not the fearful surrender he had expected. Still, there was no harm in looking at the coordinates before proceeding with the operation. Perhaps the humans had some secret installation they wanted to negotiate with. He ordered long-range sensors, focused on the indicated location. For several hours, they showed nothing. Empty space, cold and dark, just like the rest of the outer system. Then, at the exact moment specified in the timestamp, something appeared. Vatsara's sensor officers could not explain what they were seeing at first, and the readings did not make sense. An object was emerging from some kind of spatial distortion, but the size readings had to be wrong. Sensors were calibrated for ships and stations. They were not designed to track something this large. The object continued to emerge. It took nearly an hour for it to fully materialize, transitioning from whatever hidden state it had occupied to normal space. When it was finished, Vatsara finally understood what he was looking at. It was a ship larger than any planet in the Sol system except the gas giants. Its hull curved away toward a horizon that should not exist on an artificial structure. Its surface was covered with installations that his tactical computer identified as weapons, and the power readings from those weapons were higher than anything in his database. As Vatsara watched in growing horror, more signatures began appearing throughout the system. 1, 2, 5, 10, 12 in total, each one identical in scale, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy his entire fleet many times over. The human message came again, this time from the nearest of the massive vessels. Your fleet is outmatched. You are invited to send a representative aboard for discussion. We prefer peace, but are prepared for war. The choice is yours. Vatha looked at the tactical display. 12 planet-sized warships surrounded his fleet. Each one was larger than anything the Vutkai had ever built. Each one represented technology that should not exist for another 50,000 years. He had come to contain a minor species. Instead, why he had discovered that the balance of power in the galaxy had fundamentally changed. With trembling hands, he opened a channel to the Vathkai capital. Rethanos needed to know immediately. The circle of executives needed to know. Everyone needed to know. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for a century, and they had prepared very, very well. Fleet Commander Vatsara stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the impossible become real on every display around him. His crew worked in stunned silence, running scan after scan, as if repeated measurement might somehow change what they were seeing. It did not change. The 12 vessels remained exactly where they were, each one large enough to have its own gravitational field, each one bristling with weapons that his tactical computer could not even classify. His second-in-command, whose sub-commander Rethkai approached with a data tablet. Her gray skin had gone pale, and her fore kept darting toward the main display. "Initial analysis complete, Commander," she said. The vessels appear to be fully operational. Power readings suggest active weapon systems throughout their structures. Each one carries more firepower than our entire fleet combined. Vatsara absorbed this information without visible reaction. He had commanded warships for 400 years. He had faced threats that would have broken lesser officers. But he had never faced anything like this. Composition, origin, how did they build these things without us knowing? Unknown on all counts. The whole material is not in our database. The power signatures suggest technology we do not understand. As for how they remained hidden, Rethkai shook her head. They must have been building in locations we were not monitoring. The outer system between stars, places we assumed were empty because they had never given us reason to look there. Beth Sarah turned back to the display. The nearest human vessel hung in space like a small moon, its surface alive with lights and activity. Even at this distance, he could see the scale of it. The weapons platforms alone were larger than his flagship. They want to talk, he said. They invited a representative aboard. It could be a trap. If they wanted to destroy us, they could do so already. Whatever those weapons are, I do not think we could stop them. He paused, considering his options. Prepare my shuttle. I will go aboard myself. Commander, our protocol requires. Protocol did not anticipate this situation. We came here to contain a primitive species. Instead, we have discovered something that changes everything. I need to understand what we are dealing with before I make any further decisions. The shuttle ride to the human vessel took nearly an hour, even at maximum speed. As they approached, the scale of the thing became more apparent. The whole stretched in every direction, farther than the eye could see. Surface features that had seemed small from a distance revealed themselves to be massive structures, cities built into the skin of the ship. A docking bay opened to receive them. It was large enough to hold a dozen Vitakai cruisers. The shuttle seemed tiny and fragile as it passed through the opening and settled onto the deck. The Futsara emerged to find a delegation waiting. At the front stood a human woman in a simple uniform. She had the calm bearing of someone who was exactly where she wanted to be. Fleet Commander Vatsara, she said. I am Admiral Chen Wei-yin. Welcome aboard Prometheus. Vatsara studied her. Humans looked fragile to Bethkai eyes. Soft skin, vulnerable bodies, short lifespans. But there was nothing fragile about this one's expression. She looked at him without fear or hatred, just patient assessment. You will forgive me if I dispense with pleasantries, he said. I have a fleet of 12,000 ships waiting for my return. They are all aiming their weapons at your vessels. I need to understand what is happening here. One nodded. Of course. Please walk with me. Oh no. I think it will be easier to explain if you see what we have built. They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Betha saw humans going about their work, barely glancing at the alien in their midst. They did not seem surprised to see him. They did not seem concerned about the fleet outside. You have been planning this for a long time, he said. 93 years. 3 generations of work hidden from everyone, including most of our own people. Why? What do you hope to achieve? One stopped at a viewport overlooking a massive internal space. Below them stretched what looked like a small city, complete with buildings and parks, and crowds of people moving through streets. It was like looking down at a planetary surface from orbit, except this was all contained within a single ship. We want to survive, she said. That is all. We looked at galactic history, and we saw what happens to species like ours. You contain them, or you destroy them. There is no third option. Not in the galaxy as it currently works. So you built weapons to threaten us. We built weapons to make threatening us too expensive to be worthwhile. We do not want war. We never wanted war, but we understood that peace could only be maintained if we had the power to defend ourselves. Beth Sarah considered this. It was logical, he had to admit. The humans had simply done what any intelligent species would do when faced with potential extinction. They had prepared. What troubled him was how well they had prepared. How? He asked. Your technology was primitive. Your resources were limited. How did you build all this? We found new paths that your people had not explored. Your science is old, Commander. It has not changed significantly in millions of years. You found what worked, and you stopped looking for anything better. We had to find better, so we did. She led him to another section of the ship, a vast chamber filled with equipment he could not identify. Crystals the size of buildings pulsed with contained energy. Machines hummed with power that made his skin tingle, even through his environmental suit. This is one of our primary power systems, Wei-yin explained. It generates more energy than your entire homeworld consumes in a year. We have dozens of these aboard each vessel. Impossible. The physics, as you understand it. But physics is not a fixed thing. There are always deeper truths to discover. Hanaru, your people stopped looking. We kept going. Vatsara felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Genuine uncertainty. He had grown up believing that the Vuthkai were the most advanced species in the galaxy. Everything in his culture reinforced this belief. The great victories inscribed on the walls of the Circle Chamber, the vast fleets that enforced their will, the billions of years of history that supposedly proved their superiority. But looking at this ship, at technology that dwarfed anything his civilization had ever produced, he began to wonder if that belief had been wrong. "Show me the weapons," he said. Juan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, but understand, Commander, that I am showing you this not to threaten, but to explain, and I want you to understand exactly what you are dealing with, so that you can make an informed decision about how to proceed." They traveled to the forward section of the ship through kilometers of corridor and lift. Finally, they emerged onto an observation deck that looked out at a structure so large it filled the entire view. "This is the primary stellar manipulation array." Wayan said it is designed to affect stars to increase their output, decrease it, trigger flares, or in extreme cases cause a nova, or collapse into a black hole. Vatsara stared at the array. Its purpose was clear, or even to his untrained eyes: the focusing elements, the power conduits, the targeting systems. This was not a weapon for fighting ships. This was a weapon for fighting civilizations. "You could destroy our entire empire with this," he said quietly. "Oh yes. Each of the 12 vessels carries the same capability. If we chose to use them, we could sterilize every world in Bethkai space within a few decades. Everything your people have built over 18,000 years could be erased. Then why haven't you? If you have this power, why negotiate? Why not simply destroy us first and eliminate the threat?" One turned to face him directly. Her eyes were hard but not cruel. "Because that is not who we are. We built these weapons to prevent war, not to start one. We have no desire to harm your people. We simply want to be left in peace. You expect me to believe that a species builds the power to destroy civilizations and then claims it has no aggressive intentions? I expect you to believe what makes sense, Commander. If we wanted to destroy you, and we would have done so before your fleet arrived, we chose to reveal ourselves and offer dialogue instead. That should tell you something about our intentions." Vatsara was silent for a long moment. Everything she said was logical. Everything she showed him supported her claims. And yet it was difficult to accept. His entire worldview was built on the assumption that the Vithkai were dominant, that they controlled the galaxy, that no one could challenge them. That assumption had just been shattered. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "If not war, then what?" "Peace. Genuine peace, not the kind based on fear and dominance. We want to take our place in the galactic community as equals. We want the right to grow and develop, without the threat of containment hanging over us, when we want the same opportunity that every species deserves. And if we refuse, then we will defend ourselves. These weapons exist so that we never have to use them. But if we are forced to choose between extinction and fighting back, we will fight, and we will win." The statement was not a boast. It was a simple declaration of fact, delivered without anger or pride. Vatsara believed her. "I need to contact my government," he said. "They need to know what I have seen here. Of course, we will provide you with full documentation of our capabilities. We want the Vuthkai to make an informed decision. We want you to understand that cooperation is the only sensible path forward." They returned to the docking bay where his shuttle waited. As Vetter prepared to leave, Wayan spoke once more. "Commander, only I want you to know that this was never personal. We have no hatred for your people. We simply refuse to accept the role that galactic history assigned to us. We refuse to wait quietly for the day when someone decided we were a threat. We took control of our own destiny." Vatsara nodded slowly. "You have given us much to consider, Admiral. I hope your confidence and peaceful resolution is justified." "So do I, Commander. So do I." The shuttle carried him back to his flagship. As he went, he looked out at the massive human vessels hanging in space around his fleet, each one a monument to a century of secret work, each one a declaration that the old order of things had come to an end. He did not know what the circle of executives would decide. He did not know if the Vuthkai pride would allow them to accept this new reality peacefully. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: the galaxy would never be the same again. He reached the flagship and immediately opened a secure channel to the capital. High Executive Rethanos appeared on the screen, his gray face rigid with concern. "Report, Commander. We have been receiving sensor data, but we cannot interpret what we are seeing." Bethsara took a deep breath. "High Executive, I have been aboard one of the human vessels. I have seen their capabilities firsthand. We need to discuss this immediately with the full circle. How bad is it?" Vithera looked at his tactical display, at the 12 planet-sized ships that surrounded his fleet like predators circling prey. "It is worse than you can imagine," he said, "and better than we deserve. They are offering peace. I strongly recommend we accept." The transmission ended. Waveth sat alone on his bridge, waiting for a response that would determine the future of his civilization. Outside, the human vessels continued their silent vigil. They had waited 100 years for this moment. They could wait a little longer. The emergency session of the Circle of Executives lasted for 3 days. Arguments echoed through the ancient chamber as the 7 most powerful Vathkai in existence struggled to accept what Fleet Commander Vathkaya's reports told them. Some called for immediate attack. The humans were bluffing. They insisted. No species could build something like this in secret. It had to be a trick, some kind of projection or illusion designed to intimidate. The Fuxkai should call the bluff and demonstrate their power. High Executive Rethvanos listened to these arguments and said nothing. He had studied the data more closely than anyone. He had seen the energy readings, the gravitational distortions, the detailed scans that prove beyond any doubt that the human vessels were exactly what they appeared to be. It was not a bluff. The humans had somehow impossibly built weapons that dwarfed anything the Vichedikai could field. On the second day, he finally spoke. "We have 2 choices," he said. "We can accept the human offer of peace and adapt to a galaxy where we are no longer the supreme power, or we can fight and risk the destruction of everything we have built over 18,000 years. You would have us surrender," demanded Executive Cathal. "Bow to these primitives who have only been a spacefaring species for 3 centuries. "I would have us survive," Rethanos replied. "Oh, pride is a luxury we can no longer afford. The humans have offered reasonable terms. They do not seek to rule us or destroy us. They simply want to exist without the threat of containment. Is that so unreasonable? It sets a precedent. If we accept their terms, every minor species in the galaxy will think they can challenge us. Every minor species in the galaxy will see what happens when one of their numbers successfully develops the power to defend itself. Perhaps that is not a bad thing. Perhaps the old ways have run their course." The debate continued, but slowly, reluctantly, the mood in the chamber shifted. One by one, the executives came to accept that Rethanos was right. Fighting was not an option. The humans had made sure of that. On the 3rd day, the circle voted. The result was unanimous, where the Vathifkai would accept the human proposal. Admiral Chen Lin received the news in the command center of Prometheus. She had been waiting for 3 days, barely sleeping, watching the Vathifkai fleet hover at the edge of her weapons range. When the message came, she allowed herself a small smile. It was done. A century of work, a century of sacrifice, had achieved its purpose. Humanity was safe. She opened a channel to the Vitkai flagship. "Fleet Commander Vitkaira, we have received the decision of your government. We are pleased to accept their offer of peaceful negotiation." Futhsara's face appeared on screen. He looked tired, as if he too had not slept much in the past 3 days. "Admiral Chen, my government has authorized me to begin formal discussions on we would like to establish the terms of our new relationship. I am ready to meet whenever you wish. And Commander, thank you. I know this was not an easy decision for your people. It took courage to choose peace." Futhsara nodded slowly. "It took fear, Admiral. Fear of what would happen if we chose otherwise. But perhaps fear is a reasonable foundation for peace. It has worked for your species after all." Over the next few weeks, negotiations took place aboard Prometheus. Representatives from the Vidithuthkai government came and went, each one visibly shaken by the scale of what humanity had built. Treaties were drafted and revised. Terms were established. A new era began to take shape. The core of the agreement was simple. Humanity would be recognized as a full member of the galactic community, whom, with all the rights and privileges that entailed, they would have a seat on the concordat of aligned species. They would be free to expand and develop without restriction. In exchange, humanity offered something unprecedented. The Prometheus fleet would serve as guarantors of peace throughout the galaxy. Any species facing extinction-level aggression would find humanity willing to intervene on their behalf. The age of containment was over. This last provision caused the most controversy. The Vithkai had used containment as a tool of power for millennia. Giving it up meant accepting that they could no longer simply eliminate threats through force. But in the end, they had no choice. Humanity had the power to enforce their demands. It was simply a matter of what kind of galaxy they wanted to create. News of the agreement spread quickly. Within days, every species in the galaxy knew what had happened. The reactions were mixed. The Arathi, those ancient crystalline beings, were first to reach out to humanity directly. They had survived for millions of years by being useful to whoever was in power. Now they saw an opportunity to be more than servants. "We have watched the Vedokai rule for millennia," their ambassador said in his first meeting with human representatives. "They were not cruel masters, but they were masters nonetheless. We were never truly free. Perhaps with you, things can be different." The Hollow Minds, those vast intelligences that had dismissed humanity as irrelevant, issued a rare public statement. They admitted that their predictions had failed to account for a variable they had never considered: the ability of a species to fundamentally change its own trajectory through collective will. "We calculated probabilities based on observed behavior. They said humanity behaved differently than observed. We will incorporate this data into our models. It is interesting." Other reactions were less positive. Some species saw humanity's rise as a threat rather than an opportunity. They had grown comfortable with the old order, even if it meant eternal subservience. Change was frightening. A few even attempted to challenge the new arrangement. A coalition of minor powers, encouraged by remaining Bethkai hardliners, launched a surprise attack on a human colony world. Though they thought that perhaps humanity's talk of peace meant they would be reluctant to fight, they were wrong. Prometheus arrived within hours, its massive bulk filling the sky above the colony. The attacking fleet was given one chance to withdraw. When they refused, a single weapon fired, not the stellar manipulation arrays. Nothing so extreme. Just a conventional weapons discharge that vaporized the lead ship in an instant. The remainder of the fleet surrendered immediately. After that, there were no more challenges. The galaxy understood that humanity's offer of peace was genuine, but so was their willingness to fight when necessary. Years passed. The Prometheus fleet dispersed throughout the galaxy, taking up positions near major population centers. They did not threaten, they did not interfere in local affairs, they simply existed. A constant reminder that the rules had changed. Admiral Chen Wei-in remained in command of Prometheus until her 92nd birthday. She had spent her entire life preparing for a war that never came. In the end, she was satisfied with that outcome. On her final day of service, she walked through the corridors of the ship one last time. So many memories, so many sacrifices. Her grandmother, who had spent decades smiling at aliens while secretly working to protect humanity. Her mother, who had died building the engines that made this ship possible. All the millions of people who had given their lives to a dream they would never see fulfilled. She stopped at the great viewport overlooking the primary weapons array. Those terrible instruments of destruction, built with the hope that they would never be used. And they had worked exactly as intended. They had made war unthinkable. Her successor, Admiral David Park, found her there. He was the same young commander who had served under her during those tense early days, now gay-haired and decorated with honors from a dozen species. "The shuttle is ready, Admiral," he said. "Earth is waiting for you." Juan nodded, but did not move immediately. "David, do you remember what I told you on your first day aboard the ship? You said that we were not building weapons. We were building a future. Do you think we succeeded?" Park looked out at the stars visible beyond the viewport. "I think we changed things, Admiral. Whether that change lasts, that's for future generations to decide. But we gave them a chance. That's more than most species ever get." Juan smiled. It was true. And they had given humanity a chance. More than that, they had given every species in the galaxy a chance. The chance to exist without fear of extinction at the hands of their neighbors. She took one last look at the ship that had been her home for 30 years, then turned and walked toward the shuttle bay. Behind her, Prometheus continued its eternal mission, watching, waiting, protecting. On Earth, she was welcomed as a hero. Crowds gathered to see the woman who had commanded humanity's greatest weapon. Politicians made speeches about her courage and vision. But Wayan cared little for the celebrations. What she cared about was the world she saw around her. Children playing without fear. Families planning futures that extended beyond the next generation. Scientists working on problems other than survival. One artist creating beauty without worrying about whether their civilization would last long enough to appreciate it. This was what the initiative had been for. Not power, not revenge. Just the simple freedom to exist and grow and become whatever humanity was capable of becoming. She spent her remaining years teaching at the academy that trained officers for the Prometheus fleet. Young people from a dozen species came to learn from her. Humans and Betheli and Arathi and others, all working together toward a common purpose. Why did humanity do this? A student asked her once. You had the power to rule the galaxy. Why did you choose to protect it instead? One thought about the question for a long time. It was a good question. Many species, given the power humanity had built, would have used it for conquest. They would have become what they had feared, another dominating power in an endless cycle of violence. Because we knew what it felt like to be afraid, she said finally. We knew what it was like to look at the galaxy and see nothing but threats. We did not want anyone else to feel that way, not even our enemies. But the Vithkai had oppressed countless species. They had destroyed entire civilizations. Didn't they deserve punishment? Perhaps. But punishment would not have brought back the Kasari or the Yol or the singing moons. It would not have undone the suffering of the past. The only thing that could make a difference was changing the future. So that is what we tried to do. The student nodded slowly, still not entirely understanding. That was fine. Some lessons took a lifetime to learn. Hein died peacefully at the age of 107. By then, the galaxy had been transformed. The Concorded had been reformed into a true democratic assembly where every species had an equal voice. Wars still happened, but they were small and quickly resolved. No one wanted to attract the attention of the Prometheus fleet, and in the darkness between stars, the 12 vessels continued their watch. They were monuments to a simple truth that humanity had learned and taught to the galaxy. Power without compassion was just another form of tyranny. But power used to protect. Power used to give others the chance to grow and flourish. That was something worth having. That was something worth the century of sacrifice it had taken to achieve. The galaxy had looked at humanity and seen a minor species easily dismissed, easily contained. If they had been wrong, humanity had looked at the galaxy and seen a system built on fear and domination. They had decided to change it. And they had. The stars continued to shine, indifferent to the small creatures moving between them. But those creatures were no longer quite so small, and the future they were building together was brighter than anyone had dared to imagine. This was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not weapons, not power, just the simple revolutionary idea that things could be different. And they were